On the recording, and let's get going. All right, so before I kind of tell you about the security features and the stuff we're here to talk about today, I always like to start by highlighting the full portfolio of the GWN, the full portfolio of the GWN series, which is currently made up of 4 models. And as I'm sure many of you have heard me say in previous webinars, or if you've been to in-person trainings or whatnot, that this is the GWN series is really one of the largest expansions of Grandstream in our company's history. It's really going to be a focal point for us going forward. We're really putting a lot of efforts into research and development to develop an entire line of networking solutions that really make, like all of our other products, what are features that are traditionally seen as being high-end enterprise-grade features, and making them easy to use, attainable, and just accessible to businesses of all sizes. Obviously, small to medium-sized businesses have always kind of been our sweet spot. But the great thing about these GWN networking solutions is that at the moment, and they will get even better at this, we really offer models that are going to be ideal for almost every different networking solution that you are going to need to deploy. So currently you see 4 different models, 3 access points, and 1 router. Within the next couple of months, you will see an additional router that we are going to come out with, which is actually going to be kind of an all-in-one router all-in-one router access point, just like similar to, if you have cable or internet service, a lot of you will probably be given from your provider a device that is both a router and a wireless access point, and that's what our next router will be. But to talk about the 4 devices we have out now, the GWN 7610 was the first access point. That's over there on the left. The GWN 7600 is basically, in comparison to the GWN 7610, it is a device that supports a little bit slower speeds, but 200 more clients. So between the 7610 and the 7600, which are both they are indoor Wi-Fi access points, the way that I usually break it down is if you're looking for a device that's going to support the fastest speeds, if speeds are more important to you than supporting a lot of clients, like in a business, for example, an office setting, 7610 is ideal for you. If you're more interested in supporting a lot of clients and you're not really that concerned with the speeds they get, like in a retail store, a coffee shop, hotel, GWN 7600 is ideal for you. 7600 LR, that is a long-range outdoor Wi-Fi access point. Obviously, it can also be used indoors if you need something that gives you more range than the 7610 or the 7600. 7600 LR, the LR stands for long range, gives you up to 300 meter coverage range. So it's ideal for outdoor settings. It's got IP66 certified weatherproof casing, allows you to pretty much use it anywhere, outdoors, regardless of the weather conditions. However, it's also great for indoor use if you need something that has an extended range. The GWN 7000 is our router. I have a couple of slides later about that, specifically on the VPN functionality of it. But that is a multi-WAN gigabit router. Gives you built-in VPN functionality, gives you 10 gigabits per second throughput. And one thing that you see here on on every product is that bullet point for the embedded controller. We actually had a whole webinar on it the other day. For more information on that embedded controller, go check out that training webinar recording on our YouTube page. I actually do have a slide to quickly explain it because, in my opinion, it is actually somewhat of a security advantage for us. All right, so let's go through, start talking more specifically about security. So I'm going to just kind of highlight this real quickly. Those of you that have used the GWN series have seen these various encryption technologies within the web user interface. This is just to point out that we pretty much support these 6 major Wi-Fi encryption security technologies. Just a basic example there of what they're for, and I believe once we get into the technical part of it, you will see going through the web user interface the ability to implement these various technologies or encryption technologies, which serves a wide range of purposes, from providing data confidentiality, to authentication, to radius authentication, which I believe we're going to talk about here today, to even WPA, AES, and encryption technology used internationally by banks, governments, financial institutions, etc. The reason, why I point these out, and a lot of people sometimes say, like, we know what these are. There are very few manufacturers, and we really, again, when we were developing these products, took a close look at what else was out there. There are a few devices out there that are going to offer you the ability to access and use all 6 of these Wi-Fi encryption technologies. All right, so actually here I'm going to switch off this PowerPoint real fast. So these are 4 what we're calling high-end network protections that are really notable and things that are definitely worth noting and really gives us a good competitive advantage in terms of the feature set. So let me pop out of this. I'm going to pop on over to another document that actually kind of does a better job explaining this for you. How do I go full screen here? Is that possible? There we go. Oh. Whoops. All right, so if you look over here on the left side, this document, by the way, in case anyone is interested in this is a GWN reseller guide that we just came out with. Kind of gives you some tips and tools if you're a reseller and you're looking to sell these devices on, kind of how they can fit into your deployments and ways to talk to your customers about them. So the features that we're talking about here are the 4 on the left-hand side, and they're Loctite security features: random default password, secure boot, digitally assigned firmware, unique security certificate per device. And Abdel, if you have any, I'll read through these and kind of give my own explanation. If you have anything to add, please feel free to do so. So with random default password, as it says there, what we do is we build a completely different, unique random default password for every single access point, which you would think sounds like something that most manufacturers should do. Many manufacturers do not do this. What most other manufacturers are going to use is some type of predictable password method. For example, it's the MAC address of the device, local IP address, et cetera, et cetera. What we do is it is a completely randomly generated different password for every single GWN device. And so what that basically prevents is, especially upon initial launching of these devices, of your access points, when you're first building these networks, before you've gone in and changed the password on your devices, by putting in a random password, make it basically impossible for anyone to predict your password and hack into your devices while they're being set up, or potentially even before you even set them up. Whereas with other manufacturers, if you know that that manufacturer uses their MAC addresses and you are able to get access to somehow a list of their MAC addresses or predict their MAC addresses, you can very easily hack into those devices when they're set up and take over entire networks. Whereas, as I mentioned, we build a completely different randomly generated default password onto every GWN device. The second part there is secure boot. And basically what this does is our GWN series, the access points, when you turn them on and boot them up, they will verify that the software and the firmware that they're running on is uncompromised and in a fully secure state. Once that happens, the device will boot up. So this is another protection against anyone potentially hacking into your network or compromising or adjusting, even somebody within your own internal network, adjusting the firmware, putting something, piece of software or anything else that should not be on these devices. These devices will pick those up and they will not boot up if software is compromised, if anything has been installed on these devices that should not be there. So again, it's an extra protection to keep your network safe, to make sure that basically the devices can smart check to make sure that their software is not compromised, is fully functioning, the firmware is running, is secure, and has also not been compromised when they're first booted up. Digitally signed firmware pretty much explains it there. Before being downloaded onto the device, all new firmware is validated to confirm that it is genuine, unaltered, and intended for this specific purpose. Basically, these devices will make sure that the firmware that has been installed on them is the correct firmware for that device, that just like the secure boot, that it has not been tampered with, etc., etc. So not only when the device, so basically when the device will boot up, it will check its own firmware, and then we'll check everything else running with it, which is the secure boot part of it. The unique security certificate per device, that is, I guess, kind of similar to the random default password a little bit, where each GWN device has its own unique security certificate created during the device authentication process. What a lot of other manufacturers are going to do is they're going to basically offer the same security certificate to every Wi-Fi client that connects to it. So therefore, if you are able to, what's the word I'm looking for? If you are able to hack in or compromise the security certificate for any one device connected to that access point, you are able to then hack into and compromise the security certificate, and therefore the connection, and have full access to the software, the data on any device connected to that access point. Whereas, as I mentioned with our GWN series, we offer completely unique security certificate per every device. So basically, if for whatever reason one of those is compromised, the rest of the network is still always going to be safe because they run different security certificates with other devices. See a little bit just here while I have this slide up on the right there, captive portal. I think we're going to be hearing a little bit about that later on. Mainly the ability to use a radius authentication server for that captive portal. Be able to basically collect information, or not collect information, but to basically be able to have only certain users have accounts that they can access specific Wi-Fi networks running on the GWN series, and that radius authentication server can basically be used to authenticate them, make sure that that is the correct person with the right information before they access your network. So let me pop back into the slide here. I talked about the controller earlier, and I won't go into too many details here. Basically, as you can see from the picture, what we have done is we've built the functionality and everything that is the controller with other manufacturers, which is traditionally hardware, software you have to buy or purchase separately and then point to each access point or connect to each access point to set it up. We've built that functionality into the web user interface for any access point or router. So basically you can use any access point or obviously Grandstream router to control, set up, manage entire other networks of Grandstream access points. And in my opinion, where the security comes into play here is that it gives you basically one window to view your entire, I'm going to go back to this slide, one window to view everything. You don't have to connect to each access point individually. You have one centralized interface, web user interface, to manage all the access points and see the status of all the access points on your network. So you don't have to manually check in with each one. You can take basically from one screenshot, one homepage of the web user interface of our access point or of our router, which I'll show you in a second. You have basically a window into everything that is going on with that network. I'm going to come back to this. So this is what I was looking for earlier. This screenshot is of the web user interface of our router. I believe I'm almost positive that the access points are similar, and this is what I'm talking about. Right here from the screen, you can see everything on your network from one centralized spot, and it's simply a web user interface that anybody can log into pretty much from anywhere. Obviously, password protected, whatnot. It's only those you want can access it, but one window that tells you right from here everything going on with your entire network, gives you the ability to blacklist, to whitelist, to ban tier, all of that right here from one centralized location. Go back a slide here. Again, we're talking about security features. This is our router, the GWN 7000, and to touch on two specific features this offers that are important to note on security. Firewall. You see it's the second icon there. We have built-in NAT, DMZ, SPI, UPnP firewalls as well as port forwarding. In terms of VPN, the ability to create, those secure lockdown VPN networks between multiple locations or that remote users can use. This device does support those as well. OpenVPN is really the most popular that we see. As you see there, we also support a variety of other VPN functionalities. Again, to create secure networks, to share information, to share networks between two different physical locations or remote users, and to create that, use that very secure VPN functionality for that. Good. Yeah. All right. All right, so that I think that pretty much, that wraps up my intro here. Bear with us here for a second. I'm going to turn it over to Abdel. He's going to take you through the web user interface, show you a couple additional security options that you have, as well as some of the ones I've already talked about. So just bear with us here for just a moment. No problem.
All right.
All right, looks good.
All right, thank you, Phil, and thanks everyone for joining this webinar. I'm just going to take you through the web interface of the GWN 7610. It's going to be a quick presentation. So for the first time when you log into GWN, we usually use the default password admin to log in as the username and password. The GWN is going to prompt you to change the password to a different password. I strongly recommend you use something complex. So I'm already logged in. So when you're logged in, you will be presented with this dashboard style page, where it gives you information about the APs, the SSIDs, and the clients connected to those APs. You can also monitor the notifications based on the level, whether it's critical, major, or normal. So talking about the security features, some of them that you can implement on the GWN, they're going to be under the network group. So when you create your SSID and the network group, there are some few settings that you need to configure to secure the GWN. By default, every GWN comes with a network group that is called Group 0. And for the SSID, it uses GWN and then the last characters of the MAC address of the device. And then it comes with a new password. The password is always marked in the back of the GWN device, like in the tag. The first thing you need to do for the default network group is go to Wi-Fi and change the pre-shared key from the default one to one that takes into consideration, the requirements of your security policy. I would also suggest you change the SSID, because you don't want to be using the default ones, because if someone has access to the physical access point, they will be actually able to log in or to connect to the access point. So some of the security features that you can enable under the Wi-Fi settings is like SSID hidden. In case you have an SSID that is used only by few people, and those people, they know already the SSID and the password, you can just create one and then check the SSID hidden so that the GWN will not broadcast the SSID for the other people that you don't want them to use that specific SSID. Phil mentioned this, with each SSID you can use the captive portal. By default, the GWN, they come with the Granstream portal. If you are familiar with the HTML coding, you can actually go to captive portal, and we're going to talk about that later, where you can change and customize the captive portal. You can customize it with your logo or with your whatever disclaimer you want to include in it. So you have a lot of options that you can use for with the captive portal HTML file. So when you use the captive portal, you have other security modes. Of course, we always recommend using the WPA2. The reason why we have WAP web and WPA, those have been cracked. They're not secure anymore. The reason why we have them there is in case you want to use GWN with some legacy wireless devices that still supports web. And so when you use the WPA2, you have two options. You can simply use the commonly used one, which is a pre-shared key, which means you create an SSID, you give it a password, so when people they try to connect or establish a wireless connection with the access point, they will be prompted to enter the password. Or you can use the 802.1x, which works with the Radius server. This is very useful, especially when you have hotels and you have people like checking in to the hotel, and you want to provide them with access to the internet. You can actually integrate integrate the Radius server with whatever PMS or the property management system that they use in the hotel, so that every once someone checks in, the PMS will send that information to the Radius server, and then users, they will be able to log in from the access point by authenticating against the Radius server. There are plenty of Radius servers online. Some of them are free, like the free Radius, which you can run on a Linux machine. It's very easy to configure. You can actually upload all the usernames and passwords so that users, when they try to connect, they will be authenticated against the Radius. The Radius also provides information like accounting information. It's going to tell you what time that person connect to the internet, for how long they have been connected, and some other information that you can use for your accounting purposes. Next, we have some other options, like for example, client time policy, where you can configure. For example, I have one configured right here. I just called it office time. It could be anything else. Sometimes when you go to a hotel, they provide you with internet access, but they tell you, for example, you only have 2 hours of internet access per day. This is the feature that you can use to achieve that purpose. The time policy is something that you can configure under clients, and I'm going to show you later how you can do it. So I have one that is configured for office time, which gives connection to users only for 2 hours, and I specify time where the 2 hours reset. For example, I can put it at 23, which is 11 p.m., so that the GWN can reset the time and provide another 2 hours of connection. You can also use the MAC filtering for security purposes. If you have this SSID used only by few devices and you already know these devices, you can actually whitelist their MAC addresses so that only these devices will be able to connect using that SSID. Any other device, even if the SSID is broadcast, even if they see it, even if they have the right credentials, they will not be able to connect to that SSID. You can use it with the same thing, like with a blacklist, in case you would like to ban certain devices from connecting to that SSID. You can use the same thing. The MAC blacklist, I mean, when you want to include the MAC addresses for either blacklist or whitelist, it's something that you need to do under one of those sub-menus, and I'm going to show you later how you can do it. So for example, if I check the access list, it's going to give me the names of the access lists that are configured. Since I don't have any blacklists configured, it's not going to give me anything. I believe I have one for whitelist, so I don't have that one either. So you have to configure the access list so that you can see it, so that you can go and choose which access list you actually want to add to the whitelist or blacklist. Then you have this option, client isolation, which is very useful in case you want to use the access point for guest network. Client isolation, basically what it does, so when users, they connect into, you connect to the access point and then they have access to the internet, you have three options of connections. I mean, three types of connections that you can provide for those wireless clients. There is radio, there's internet, and there's gateway MAC. And I have a few slides here that explains each one of them. For example, the all right. So for example, for the gateway MAC mode, so when you choose that mode, that means the wireless clients, they're not going to be able to talk to each other. They're not going to be able to access the access point, the GWN. They will only be able to access the internet and access the router, whatever router you have in your network. If you choose the radio mode, you allow the wireless clients to have access to the internet, the GWN for configuration, the router for configuration, but these devices, they're not going to be able to talk to each other, which means if you have an FTP server, if you have an email server, if you have printers, those devices will not be able to connect to those devices in your network. The third mode, which is even more strict, you provide only internet access to users, which means they're not going to be able to talk with each other. They're not going to have access to the access point, and they're not going to be able to access the router of your network. So based on your requirements, you can choose one of these modes, especially when you create an SSID for guests and you don't want them to have access to local devices in the network. You can also, when you create, like, for example, an SSID for guests, you can also specify the upstream and downstream so that your network will not be eaten up by the streaming from guests connected to your network. You can also schedule. When you create an SSID, you can, for example, use it only for the office time from Monday to Friday, so that people who come after office time or out of business hours, they're not going to be able to connect to the access points, even if they have the right credentials. This is especially useful, especially when you have your SSID open and you want only to make it available for guests during business hours. You can actually configure schedule so that nobody can connect out of business time. For the SSIDs, as Phil mentioned earlier, on the GWN 7610, you can have up to 16 SSIDs in case you need that number of SSIDs. Pretty much the same settings that we configured under the access or the network group are the same settings available under the SSIDs. So when you have clients, you can actually access the clients. You can see which clients or which devices are connected to the access point. You can go to the device, actually set the bandwidth rule, the one that you configure, and the bandwidth rules. Since I don't have anything configured, it's not showing up here, but once I have it configured and the bandwidth rules, I can just click on add a new item and then apply the bandwidth rules to that specific client, especially if I notice that that client, for example, uses a lot of bandwidth or does a lot of video streaming. You can also configure it with an IP and the host name so that when you see it on the network, you would know what device is that one. The client access, we talked about that one. This is where you include the MAC addresses. For example, if you want to name that one a whitelist of MAC addresses, then you can include the MAC address under this tab. And just save and apply. So once you create the whitelist client access, then you will be able to access this same access list from the network group, and then you can apply it to SSIDs. The time policy, we talked about that one. For example, this is only for guest network, and I can enable that one, and then I can provide them with 2 hours of internet access, and then I can tell the GWN to reset the 2 hours every day at 11 p.m. Then save and apply. So when you have your access list configured on the router, you can actually come under band client, so you can see the MAC addresses that try to connect to your access point, and the access point just rejected the connection. You're going to see all the MAC addresses here, so you can add them to a certain list of blacklists that you want to add to the GWN, so that these devices will never connect to the wireless network. For the captive portal can provide you with security options, and one of them is, as I mentioned earlier, that depends on the HTML file that you're going to be using. For example, if you're using the captive portal with Radius server, you can choose, for example, portal password. So when they try to connect using the captive portal, the GWN is going to prompt them to enter the username and a password that is in the Radius server. So you just need to include the information of the Radius server, the IP. By default, the Radius server is using port 8012 for authentication and 1813 for accounting. You can customize those ports depending on what Radius server you're going to be using. The bandwidth rule, we talked about that one earlier. You can set up a bandwidth rule based on the SSID, or based on the MAC address, or based on the IP address. So you have three options. For example, I have specific MAC address. I can just type it in there, and then I can tell, for example, the access point, this device, whenever it connects to the internet, just give it the minimum bandwidth. For example, I can give it only 1 meg up and 1 meg down, and then save and apply. And then I just go to the device under the clients, and then choose this bandwidth rule, and then apply it to that specific device. System settings. This is basic information. The port to access the web UI of the access point, which is the default HTTPS port 443. You can change that one if you want to. The upgrade. You can always point the GWN to the Granstream website, which is firmware.grandstream.com. Some of them, they might come with the gaps link, which is fm.grandstream.com/gs. If you have that link, make sure you change it to firmware.grandstream.com. Save, and then click on upgrade, so that the GWN can start the upgrade process. These are some information about the access. As I mentioned, the first time the GWN is going to prompt you to change the password. In case you would like to change the password, just come back to maintenance, access, and then put a new password to access the GWN. So that was a quick presentation of the web UI of the GWN. Feel free to ask any questions, and we're going to be here to answer them for you.
Awesome, thanks, Abdel. Yeah, so actually we covered a little bit more and went a little bit longer than I thought, which is good. So at the moment, feel free to type over any questions. I have a couple that I will go through right now. Specifically for the router, when you're using OpenVPN, are all the LAN ports shared?
So I have a router here, the GWN 7000. So when you create the OpenVPN, one, let's say I'm going to create an OpenVPN, you're actually going to specify the interface. If you would like to use, for example, WAN1, you can choose WAN1 to become part of the OpenVPN, or to be the OpenVPN interface. If you would like to use all the interfaces, just go ahead and choose all, and the OpenVPN is going to apply to all the interfaces on the GWN router.
Cool. Can the access points have different authentication settings depending on the SSID settings?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you go to the GWN and then you create an SSID, let's say, for example, I'm going to change this one. Every SSID has its own security mode and protocol. For example, I can use the first one with the pre-shared key, but I want to use the second one to be authenticated against a Radius server. So you can apply different security modes to different SSIDs.
Cool. When you're connecting two offices, which is usually what a VPN's for, in your experience, what method of VPN would you recommend?
I would suggest to go with the OpenVPN because it's more flexible, it's widely used, it's open source, so you're not going to have any issues. Just when you do it, when you try to connect two locations, make sure you use site-to-site implementation, which means implement it at the router level.
Can you tell us about load balancing and if we support it, and if so, kind of how it works or how you would take advantage of it?
So most likely you're talking about the GWN, the router.
Yep.
So when you go to the router and then you select the ports, if you have both like WAN 1 and WAN 2 enabled, you can just go to global settings, and under global settings you have this option. Do you want to use a failover, which means use WAN 1 as the main port, and then if WAN 1 is not responsive, to switch automatically to WAN port 2. So the way it works with load balancing, for example, if you're using WAN 1 and WAN 2, it's based on the connection. For example, if you have one TCP connection for web UI and another one is connecting, for example, to a Facebook, so each connection is going to be using a different interface for load balancing.
Cool. Read that one, Tony. We should ask that.
Sweet.
Okay. So a question on the GWN 7000, the router. When clearing leases on the device, it drops. This user is reporting that it drops all the leases, including existing used leases. How can we schedule when a lease is cleared, or when lease cleared events can happen?
So this is again about the GWN. So we're going to go to network group. So we're going to create one. Just give it any name. So can you go back to the question?
Yeah,
Phil,
sorry.
please? Thank you.
So on the GWN 7000, when clearing leases, it drops all the leases, including existing used leases. How can we schedule when a lease cleared event can happen?
I mean, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I think you're talking about the lease time. If that's the thing, you can just configure it under the, when you create the network group, you just specify the lease time so that when the router assigns an IP to a certain device, it's going to time out after 12 hours. Usually the devices, they renew the IP before a certain time, which is like probably 9 hours. They're going to renew the IP instead of waiting for 12 hours.
Cool. All right, any final questions, type them over. At the moment, I have two more. Hold on one sec. So at the moment, I have two more questions, which I will answer out loud. They're a little bit more general questions I think are good for everyone to know. Do we have competitor comparison charts? Absolutely. If you are a member of our Reseller Connect reseller program, log in, and within that portal, I believe within the marketing documents section, there should be a spot for competitor comparison charts, and if there is not one for these GWN series, you should probably see them up there very soon. Next question, is there a cloud management solution for the GWN? There is one coming. Within the next month, we are actually going to launch a free trial testing program for what I believe we're calling GWN Cloud, which will be a cloud controller that can, I believe, will be based on a freemium model of if you are doing less than 1,000 access points, you'll be able to use this software for free. If you're doing more than 1,000 access points, there might be some type of cost involved just because of the back-end hosting on our end. But yeah, that is coming. I would say that it will be publicly available by March or April of next year. So keep an eye out for that. GWN Cloud will give you the ability to control literally almost endless amounts of these devices. And if you're controlling 1,000 or less, it will most likely be free software for you. All right, here we go. Under load balancing, can you specify what types of packets, sorry, trying to understand the question. You get it?
No, you don't have those options.
Okay.
No, that's not, for that question, it's not possible, Doc.
All right, yeah, so Doug, to your question about load balancing, can you specify what types of packets? Unfortunately, with our device, we do not support that at the moment. Question on the throughput of the router. I believe it's 10 gigabits per second is what we say for the GWN 7000. And Nino, to your question, if you're having specific issues with that lease time or it just drops everything at 12 hours, as was suggested, I would definitely open a ticket with us and we can investigate that a little bit further.
No, it's like a aggregation. No.
Okay. There was a question also about bandwidth binding in the chat. We do not support that at the moment. Yeah, so I think that pretty much looks like it wraps up the questions. If anyone has anything final, we'll hang around for a couple of moments and answer questions through the chat or through typing the answer to you through the question and answer. But for everyone else, that'll wrap up today's webinar. Appreciate you being with us. To learn a little bit more about the security features of the GWN series. Keep an eye out for a lot more of these webinars as we go over the next couple of months. This is, as I'm sure I recognize many of these names from other webinars. You guys know that we do these on a consistent basis, so keep an eye out for emails on these webinars. One thing that I'll talk about here, you've probably seen some emails on it. I talk about it in other webinars. We just launched what I guess I would call an official in-person training certification program that we're calling Grandstream Academy. This basically just takes all the in-person trainings that we were already doing all around the world and creates a standard formal certification program around it. It is all accessible on a website. It is academy.grandstream.com, where you can see trainings, sign up for them, view information that, basically prep for those prep for your training classes, take exams after, renew your training certifications, see which other ones are out there. We currently are offering 3 different levels of training certification, really to the public at large. It's really specialist level, which is more of a basic level training, and then a professional training, which you're going to get from the 1 or 2 day in-person trainings. We're offering them for our UCM series of IPPBXs, the GWN series of networking solutions, as well as our GDS 3710. So head on over to academy.grandstream.com to check out any in-person trainings. Next year, you'll actually see that for the lower level training certification, we will make webinars available online for you to get certified for that lower level just from your computer, wherever you are. Yeah, check out Grandstream Academy at academy.grandstream.com. And again, thanks for being with us here for today's webinar. Know it's a very busy time of the year, being the holidays, and everyone's got a lot to do. So appreciate you spending some time with us. We hope to see you at another Grandstream webinar soon. And happy holidays to everybody. Take care.